This is Radio Goélette, Paris FM, the right frequency, 9 p.m. Dream Time. Here's tonight's show, and what a show! A trip around the capital in 26 minutes. Fasten your seatbelts. Firstly, 3 minutes of uninterrupted music and lots of sound pictures. For what comes next, just follow us. Today, Saint Geneviève is the patron saint of Paris. Her statue, by Landowski, stands on the bridge of La Tournelle. In the second half of the 12th century, Louis VII's moral authority, Maurice de Sully's passion for building, and the discovery of a new construction method, with ribs and buttresses supporting a vaulted roof, led to the creation of Notre Dame Cathedral. Nowadays, freed from the medieval buildings that surrounded it, the flawless design of its west side is revealed. This facade presents in perfect unity the strict harmony of a threefold rhythm: the triple portal, the Gallery of Kings, and the upper openwork gallery. The towers, on which are perched fantastic animals recreated by Viollet-le-Duc, diminish the impression of massiveness by drawing the eye from the lower square construction towards the sky. After a few moments' pause to become accustomed to the interior's blend of light and darkness, the visitor can appreciate the double bays of the nave, the cylindrical pillars, the great arcades, the arcade galleries, the six-fold vaulting, and the semicircular choir glowing with the symbolic light of its stained glass windows. In the North Bay, the best preserved rose window dates from around 1270. Its blue tones illustrate biblical subjects from the Old Testament. Also on the island, in the shadow of the palace of the law-giving king who had it built between 1246 and 1248, stands the Sainte-Chapelle. In this translucent reliquary, designed to contain the most venerable relics of Christ's Passion, the stained glass windows radiate their dazzling splendor on all sides. Its elegant construction is the culmination of Gothic architecture in Paris. Of the ancient residence of the Capetian dynasty, the Conciergerie still exists, with its 4 towers, 3 of them round with pointed roofs, and 1 square tower on which, in the year 1370, was placed the first public clock in Paris. In 1655, it struck absolute monarchy's hour of glory, when Louis XIV, booted and spurred, with a whip in his hand, dictated his orders to Parliament. But it also struck, in 1793, the end of the old regime, the hour of the guillotine for Marie Antoinette. Before then, once again during the Middle Ages, but this time on the right-hand bank of the river, the power of the bourgeoisie began to take form. Etienne Marcel, provost of the merchants, established the seat of the municipality at the House of Pillars in the Place de Grève. Francis I had a building constructed in the Renaissance style of his time. Destroyed by fire during the Commune uprising of 1871, it was rebuilt in the same place. Its exterior is barely modified, but the grand reception rooms of today's City Hall were designed in the style of the 19th century, which is very different from the original Renaissance decoration. A short distance away stands the Georges Pompidou Art and Culture Center, opened in 1977. Then further east we come to the Marais, which as its name indicates was marshland. Religious orders were the first to settle there and began to render it habitable. Then great nobles came to build their country homes named courtilles. The Hôtel de Sens is a rare example of late 15th century private architecture. The facade is of great artistic interest, with projecting turrets, dormer windows and a porch. Since its restoration, The Quartier des Précieuses testifies to the genius of 17th century builders. Henry IV was the instigator of this transformation. He created the ancient royal square now called the Place des Vosges. The first building was the great southern pavilion known as the King's Pavilion, which was completed in 1608. The architectural ensemble is a quadrilateral of 36 pavilions with arcades, combining white stone and red ochre brick facades with the slate of its high hip roofs. Henry IV was assassinated on the 14th of May 1610, and so did not see the completion of the Royal Square, whose inauguration took place in April 1612. From then on, the square became the fashionable dwelling place of many famous men and women. The Marais district has several fine properties, such as the Hôtel de Sully, the Hôtel d'Albret, the Hôtel de Soubise, the Hôtel Rohan, and the Chalon Luxembourg, among others. Even today, picturesque streets still exist, such as the Rue du Prévost, Charles V Street, the Street of Lions, the Rue Beautreilly, where Baudelaire lived, Rue Charlemagne, and many others. The foundation stone of the famous fortress of the Bastille was laid in 1370. It was designed as a military bastion and only became a state prison at the time of Richelieu. It was pulled down after the 14th of July 1789, and for a while the site was a favourite spot for leisurely walks. But in 1840 it was made into a public square, and a column was set up, topped by a figure of the Spirit of Liberty taking flight as it breaks its chains and spreads the light of freedom. King Henry IV astride his horse dominates the Pont Neuf, which, despite its name, is the oldest bridge in Paris. For 400 years, those strolling across it have been able to admire a monumental panorama reflected in the waters of the river, on whose banks stand the noble buildings erected by a triumphal monarchy. Along the right bank stretches the Louvre, prolonged by the Tuileries, forming the grand design planned by generations of artists between the reigns of Francis I and Napoleon III. Considerable work undertaken by the Historical Buildings Department of the Louvre Palace has restored the original appearance of the architecture, but the addition of modern developments and new techniques was necessary for the reception of visitors and the display of our cultural heritage. The pyramid designed by the Chinese-American architect Pei, set up in the center of the Cour Napoleon and bordered by the three facades of the Richelieu, Sully and Denon pavilions, was inaugurated in April 1989. First a fortress, then a dwelling, the Louvre now combines these two functions, protecting and sheltering its cosmopolitan guests, among them the Venus from the island of Milo and the Mona Lisa painted by Leonardo da Vinci. The one offers to Parisians her beauty issued from antiquity, the symbol of a Mediterranean civilization with which our culture is imbued. The other, in her armoured frame, conveys to them a smiling greeting from the Italian Renaissance. The old Orsay railway station and hotel were saved from demolition in 1978 when they were listed as historic monuments. After imaginative remodelling, they have become the Orsay Museum, which was opened to the public at the end of 1986. Visitors can discover various types of works of art, such as sculpture, paintings and pastels, covering the period from 1848 to 1914. Toulouse-Lautrec, Renoir, Sisley, Cézanne, Van Gogh and many others are represented in the spacious halls of the museum. The Hôtel des Invalides is a splendid masterpiece designed by Libéral Bruant and Ardouin Mansart for the great king, who had conceived it for a double purpose: one charitable, as a rest home for veteran soldiers; the other purely egocentric, as personified in the royal church dominated by the subtle contour of its dome. The great emperor rests there in his red granite tomb, near the people of France whom he so loved. By this testimonial, he eclipses the glory of the Sun King Louis XIV. Louis XV, Louis XIV's great-grandson, also contributed to the beautifying of Paris by the creation of the vast square which originally bore his name, then later became the Square of the Revolution and finally of the Concorde. It was designed by Gabriel to serve as a monumental frame for the equestrian statue of the beloved king, as Louis XV was known. His grandson Louis XVI was beheaded there on the 21st of January 1793. In the center of the square stands the oldest monument in Paris, the Luxor obelisk, engraved 33 centuries ago with hieroglyphs glorifying Pharaoh Ramses II. Looking northwards, we discover the perspective of the Rue Royale leading to the Madeleine. Facing it, on the right bank, stands the Palais Bourbon, seat of the National Assembly. The avenue with a mythological name, the Champs-Élysées or Elysian Fields, is a section of the east-west axis. According to an author of the period, in the 18th century it was either torrid or frozen, a field of mud or of dust, which dislocates carriages, tires out their horses, and annihilates any unlucky pedestrian who takes the risk of coming to this place. But Paris slowly improved its favourite promenade. It was concluded by the Arch of Triumph, built by Chalgrin from 1806 onwards, to the glory of the new Caesar, Napoleon I. On one of its piers, the flamboyant oratory of the Victory by Rude, with arms outstretched in a heroic gesture, symbolizes our national anthem. Under the arch, an entire population pays homage to the self-sacrifice of its most humble soldiers. The eternal flame burns over the flower-bedecked sacred flagstone, under which lies the tomb of the unknown soldier of the First World War. To the west, on the opposite bank of the Seine, firmly embedded in the greenery of the Champ de Mars by an engineer enamoured of metal structures, the Eiffel Tower has finally contrived to be accepted as a familiar landmark between Gabriel's Military Academy and the Palais de Chaillot, dating from the 1937 exhibition. The boldness of its design can be expressed in tons, 7,000, in meters, 320 to the top of the television antenna, 274 to the uppermost platform, from which can be seen a bird's-eye view of the capital and the surrounding area. The tower is, in every sense of the word, the summit of tourism and the souvenir industry. With its 15,000 metal girders bolted together by 2.5 million rivets, it has, since its opening in 1889, symbolized Paris more than any other monument. Another high point of the left bank, though far more modest with its 65 meters, the Montagne Sainte-Geneviève serves as a base for the foundations of the Panthéon. Begun by Soufflot in the manner of the great dome churches, completed in the early days of the Revolution, it then became a vast mausoleum destined to receive the ashes of famous men: Voltaire, Braille, Victor Hugo, Zola and Jean Moulin, among others. Lower down, the Luxembourg, with its ponds, its terraces, its French-style flower beds and English landscape gardens. It's an oasis of cool green tranquility for the neighbouring residents and students, and a playground for children who come to enjoy the puppet show. It is also the setting of the new palace that Marie de Medici, the widow of Henry IV, had built by Salomon de Brosse. Today it is the seat of the Senate. How pleasant it is to stroll along the streets between the boulevard and the Seine around the venerable Romanesque steeple of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. The Prévert group and the existentialist duo of Sartre and de Beauvoir still haunt this district of bookshops, antique dealers, underground discotheques, terraced cafes and taverns called Flore, Lip and Les Deux Magots. At the far end of the Avenue de l'Opéra, created during the Second Empire by Baron Haussmann, stands the Palais Garnier Opera House, a contemporary of Wagner and Verdi. The facade, in Napoleon III style, as it was named by the architect himself, consists of a monumental terrace, arcades under a loggia, and an immense dome crowning the edifice, which is ornamented by a collection of statues and groups, notably that of the dance by Carpeaux. The butte or hillock of Montmartre rises above the rooftops. To consider the name Montmartre as derived from the Mount of Martyrs is an etymological fantasy, although, according to legend, this is where Saint Denis was beheaded. The basilica, an immaculate construction in Roman Byzantine style dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, perpetuates the Christian tradition from the hilltop. short distance away from the Place du Tertre, the paint daubers set up their easels, ready for the tourists. The streets of the village are still as steep and narrow as the ancient lanes that wound their way through the vineyards, and some cultivation of grapes takes place even now in Montmartre, quite close to the Moulin de la Galette painted by Renoir, opposite the Lapin Agile, where the Bohemian fraternity used to join Bruant in singing realistic ballads. Poets and painters Picasso, Braque, Matisse, Van Dongen, Apollinaire, Max Jacob met aboard the Bateau Lavoir, flagship of Cubism, anchored in the Rue Ravignan. At the Moulin Rouge ball, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec immortalized the naturalistic Can-Can quadrille and its star performers, Boneless Valentin, Jeanne Avril, the dancer known by the charming name of Drain Grating, and Lagoulou, the greedy one. Today it is a cabaret which, more than any other, represents all the pleasures sought by foreign visitors to Paris by night.